Alright everyone, we start off today with a little bit of an admonition for people who consider themselves maybe liberal, center-left. I know that being in the center or close to moderate really doesn't mean anything, because like a Bolshevik would consider themselves to be moderate and say, well, I'm not a even further left. I don't want the state to control everything. I just want more welfare, progressive or something. I made a video as soon as Donald Trump got elected, and people will remember this maybe. Telling people not to worry, like telling the Democrats, ultimately at the end of the day, Donald Trump is not an extremist. He's not fanatic. He's a mild reformer. His idea of populism is really what was governing the United States maybe through most of the early Cold War era, certainly into the first term of Reagan. Not once Reagan got Alzheimer's, though. Then he became a corporatist. He leans off into la-la land and starts warmongering more, which is why I think Trump was better than Reagan. Apparently a popular opinion among the Republican lay. Here's the thing. That was correct. Legacy media propaganda aside, I know, insurrection, he's a bigot, orange man bad. Okay. Ultimately, a proper refresher course in the actions of his presidency was pretty good, pretty balanced. Attempting to secure the border, first president to seriously do that, despite all previous presidents talking the talk, he walked the walk. We got tax reform. It was mainly aimed at the middle class and small businesses. Biden trying to undo that as quickly as possible. Other than mean tweets and the pounding hand on table diplomacy, it was a pretty relaxed time, and I think that a lot of liberals now are realizing they were sold a pig in a poke with Joe Biden, and I'd like to say this. Here's another message to the Democrat lay, to the liberals. As we watch Biden's polls plummet, there's what I consider to be a predictable drop in his approval. We've got new polling, and even Reuters, which missamples heavily in Biden's favor, even they're showing him with an 8-point disapproval gap. So the writing is on the wall. His speech the other day was so divisive, so incoherent, and especially in the Q&A part after, so abysmal, that even CNN is no longer bothering to defend him. Even they have a problem with it. I'm not even talking about opinion pages this time. They've got like mainline articles up there saying, well, this isn't really what we wanted, and we're beginning to grow skeptical of Biden's ability to fend off the Republicans throughout the midterms, and maybe we should start thinking about 2024 and whether that's really the face of the party that we want. People can be fickle. In Biden's case, he gives them good reason to be. So I would just like to say this to people out there that consider themselves liberal or center-left. I know it's not going to matter for the progressives. It's not going to matter for the 20% of the population that's deeply entrenched in Dem partisandom. A Republican would get the same treatment from Republican partisans, so I'm not really talking to them. For everyone else, it's okay, finally now, after a year of Biden's nonstop failures, he has accomplished literally nothing. It's okay to admit you were wrong, because there's more shame in being unable to admit that you're wrong and stubbornly holding to a lie, like, Biden's actually doing a good job. Here's the top 5 reasons. Record job creation, which he has nothing to do with, or COVID lull in cases because of his N95s, which will coincidentally overlap with the drop in Omicron that's already begun anyway. It's okay to admit that you were sold a pig in a poke by the Democratic Party harping about insurrection and mean tweets and all these things, and by the legacy media that spent 4 years nonstop trashing Trump, usually based on anonymous sources, and has spent the last year attempting to convince you that Joe Biden's doing a good job. He clearly isn't. His economy's not working for the average person. He can be as obtuse and as lacking in self-awareness as he wants and say, I've outperformed expectations, actually. It's not being taken seriously, including by many liberals now. I would advise you to take the L, realize that you, in the primaries especially, didn't get a qualified candidate, and that his entire asterisk administration began primarily because Donald Trump tweeted the wrong way. That's really what you were sold. You were sold a pig in a poke, as I call it. That's an old term. It's not used nearly enough. Now, keep in mind, before I launch into this a little bit further, because, again, the writing's on the wall at this point. If we look at every aspect of polling, They all coincide, and I'm skeptical of individual polls, and I'm skeptical about blocks of polls. But when they're all saying the same thing, again, you can't judge the real number, but you can judge the velocity. Keep in mind down below, if you're watching this video on YouTube, as fewer and fewer of you are, a lot of people moving to BitChute, Rumble, and Odyssey especially. Keep in mind, there will be pinned comments down below, a pinned comment down below with links to other video hosting sites that I use to upload content. Keep in mind, I make exclusive material on those platforms every single day that does not go on YouTube. A lot of it has to do with spicy topics that YouTube no longer allows people to talk about unless they are priority creators. If you're Jimmy Kimmel or Cenk Uygur, you're allowed to say whatever you want. There are no rules on YouTube anymore to constrain you because it's turning into an on-demand service. As Razorfist so astutely pointed out several years ago, would probably continuously be more and more the case. Now, here's the thing. What happened in this last election is that an absolute tidal wave of propaganda and lies were perpetuated by a legacy media that we now know is literally in bed with the current administration. The asterisk administration, honk honk as I call it. We know this. It's been bragged about fairly recently. For the liberals out there that did not notice this, if it escaped notice, Oliver Darcy of CNN had openly proclaimed, yeah, we're getting correspondence from the Biden White House asking us to portray a more positive picture of the economy for Joe Biden. They're not the only ones doing this. I've been able to trace it. One of my long-term little projects is linguistic in nature. When you see a boatload of legacy media sites reporting the same concept, slightly different wording, and their articles are written slightly differently, they're probably told to do this because copying one another's homework is a little bit too obvious, and they all put out the same wagon-circling defense of Joe Biden's economy, or of some foreign policy tidbit at the same time, it's because there's one central source from where they're getting the talking points. They're getting it from the Biden White House. This is not new. To be clear, Biden is the first one for which this is bragged about under the auspices of, well, we have to fight disinformation. People think the economy's bad because Russian propaganda, which is also bullshit. It happened under the Clinton campaign. You'll remember that some of the leaks, the DNC leaks at the time, which were exposed by WikiLeaks actually, for which people think that they're Russian propagandists too, because of the big lie that the Democrats spun about that ever being a thing. Hint, hint, it wasn't. What happened is that we know MSNBC, CNN, and a few others were openly coordinating with the Clinton campaign. They were holding dialogue with regards to the coverage of the election, and they were being begged by Clinton's people to portray things in a more happy light, and they responded dutifully. They did so. It was difficult towards the end with the server scandal and all of the other things happening and the entire Dem narrative collapsing, and Hillary Clinton collapsing too on 9/11, if you remember correctly, but they attempted to foist her into office to be Madam Dictator, and it failed. Donald Trump is elected. For 4 years, the media, technically speaking, did its job. Anything that he did wrong was gone through with a fine-tooth comb and held under multiple microscopes, and they fixated on it constantly. Problem was they also engaged in yellow journalism, in which they spun goofy stories based on anonymous sources that in all likelihood most of the time never existed. There was no Russian collusion between the Trump campaign and Putin. There was no election interference. The 2016 election was fine. And also, Trump never hired hookers to piss on the Obama's bed. Trump never attempted to overturn the election results in Georgia. That was debunked very quickly, but the legacy media inexplicably continued to report that it was true. That happened over and over and over again. By the way, his approval was a bit higher than Biden's is at this point, at the same point in his presidency, despite Biden having the wagon circled. But now the wheels are coming off that wagon, and it's going to be a little bit harder to circle them. Because his speech the other day was indefensible. He preemptively questioned the results of upcoming elections, which is something we were told not long ago was insurrectionist activity, by the way, and deeply unpatriotic. Biden himself pointing this out only a couple weeks prior, on January 6th, with his goofy speech there. So he did that. The economy is getting worse, not getting better. We were told that it would be transitory inflation and that it was good for us, and Using the metrics used in the 70s or 80s, inflation right now would be well into the double digits. So we're clear it would be equal roughly to the Carter recession. We've got shortages still. Propaganda aside from shills claiming that those are all old pictures from 2020. No, they're not. I can vouch for many of them. They're sent in constantly as tips by people that took the footage themselves. They're not all from 2020. A few of them that were posted out there are, but then the legacy media takes that and extrapolates it to be all videos and all pictures of shortages. We have a looming crisis in Ukraine. Biden is not going to be capable of dealing with it, as he effectively showed the other day. And it was funny. Biden preemptively questioning the legitimacy of the midterm elections if his election bills were passed, that was given a pass by the legacy media. Everyone else talking about it. What does the legacy media focus on? His Ukraine comments. Well, if there's just a little bit of an incursion into Ukraine by the Russians, if they only kill a few Ukrainians, then it's okay. They're not going to suffer major consequences from us fiscally for that. Russia, meanwhile, has like 100,000 troops drawn up on the border and just decided to ban crypto trading because it might help the United States financially. Russia's doing everything that you would expect them to do in preparation for a relatively major assault. I don't think Biden's equipped to deal with that. I expect that Russia will probably move into Ukraine and we will do effectively nothing. It's sort of like when Barack Obama, you'll remember this, liberals, and you may have supported it at the time, but clearly the majority of the independent voters didn't. And so it's an optics problem, it's a political problem, and Biden strategically should know better. Supposedly he's this great strategist making all of these jobs, and he's great. In his own mind, he's basically perfect. Supposedly doing such a great job. It sounds exactly like when Obama said, well, if you start using certain weapons, it's a red line for us, and we'll get tough on you, Bashar al-Assad. No, you didn't. All you did was give weapons to terrorists. But I shouldn't be surprised that Biden is following in the footsteps of Barack Obama on this issue, because he was also following in those footsteps with Afghanistan. He wrecked the country, handed it to the Taliban, and although we needed to end the war there, and thanks Trump, because again, you were the one that brokered the peace deal, Biden decided to unilaterally push it back by 6 months, angering the Taliban, giving them justification to go out and recruit people that weren't members before, giving them the manpower to be able to do what they did. And then he left behind tens of billions of dollars in U.S. vehicles, weapons, and other aid. Now, the geniuses of the Biden administration are saying, hey, we need to give more aid to the Afghan people. Where do you think that money's going? It's going right into the pockets of Osama's family. That's the truth. It's okay to admit that upon a preponderance of his first year in office, Joe Biden has done a more poor job than any other modern president. More poor than Carter, especially on economic issues, although he wasn't great on foreign policy. And some of the Carter era was not Carter's fault. In fact, Jimmy Carter, if he runs in 24, would be a more credible candidate than Biden or Kamala or Madam Hillary, who apparently is at least feebly considering the possibility of running again. It's okay to admit that his foreign policy blunders are severe. It's okay to admit that everything's screwed up and that the buck stops with Biden. You can do the throwaway, as I'll even grant you, that Biden doesn't make many of his own decisions. His speeches are scripted. His question and answer sessions are rehearsed long beforehand. His policies are ghost-written by staffers and by other Democrats. But he's still, honk honk, the asterisk president of the United States, and he doesn't have anyone else to blame for everything going on. I would close with one additional problem, and that's COVID. It was never realistic to expect Biden would get rid of COVID. The problem is that he pretended that that was realistic. In his own words, I'm not going to shut down the country, I'm going to shut down the virus. The virus didn't get shut down, although he's throwing up his N95 Hail Mary to try to take credit for the inevitable drop in cases as they begin to plateau, which they are. Those masks aren't going to be what causes that. It's natural. It'll happen in places that are unmasked as well as masked. It's happening already in other countries because it's fairly predictable how long it takes to burn through its host reservoir. He's trying that, but otherwise, he had nothing to do with it. The problem, again, is his promise that he would. He put himself in the position to take the blame for the rise in cases by saying that there would be no rise in cases because he was handling it. There is no issue on which Joe Biden has done anything better than at least a poor job. We would give him poor marks on most things. We would give him an outright failure on most of the rest. I can't think of a single success in his entire first year. He controls the House. He has technically narrow control of the Democrats in the Senate. Manchin and Sinema are now the whipping boy and girl of the entire party. Well, Biden would be doing so much better if it weren't for obstruction. This is a bipartisan obstruction. Hell, he had some Republicans vote for the infrastructure bill. A bipartisan group of people representing their constituents are saying enough is enough. No, we're not going to have a nationwide vax mandate. We're tired of all of the shit going on. We're not going to pass multi-trillion-dollar additional spending driving inflation even higher. You're nuts. He has bowed to the far left of the party and apparently is too stupid to realize that represents a tiny minority of the United States. I'm not surprised that lean left individuals and people who are casual liberals are flying out of the party by the millions. Biden has also, for those of you who are more pragmatic liberals, pragmatic Democrats, you're like, well, the policy thing's secondary. We got to win first. You think you're going to win with Joe Biden doing this? The Republicans now have a 5-point registration advantage. This is their largest advantage in living memory. You have a deficit on the congressional ballot. It's not getting better. Biden's approval's not getting better. The economy's not getting better. Foreign policy is about to blow up in the fucker's face. If you're a pragmatic liberal, it's time to admit you were wrong and demand he resign. Yeah, that means President Kamala. She'll be a failure too. Wouldn't it be funny? Even if just for the goddamn lulz. I know there are some liberals out there that meme. So, admit you were wrong. You got conned. You got sold a pig in a poke. It's okay to do that. The problem is it's shameful to continue not admitting that you were wrong. There is no way to justify Biden's first year in office. It's a failure. You can't justify it. At least Trump, by this point in his presidency, he had undone the ACA mandate, if not the ACA itself, after 3 fucking failures in a row. Not his most shining moment, although part of that was definitely the fault of people like Paul Ryan, and even Rand Paul couldn't get it done. That was the writing on the wall. You were attempting to build a wall. Took a couple more years to get the funding past the Republicans because they love to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. You had talks going on with North Korea by now. What's Biden accomplished? He doesn't make mean tweets. Well, he still casts aspersion on half the population, but he's less obtuse about it. That's it. That and an infrastructure deal that even the left doesn't like because Manchin watered it down. No accomplishments whatsoever. 0 out of 10 presidency. The first in even Bush had better selling points at this point than Joe Biden does. That's about all. Peace out.